We're just starting the Mishnah of Gittin. Now, notionally, a get means a divorce, and notionally, the Mishnah Gittin is about divorce. But practically, it's a rich and complex tractate, and we mentioned, I think, yesterday when we looked at the first few Mishnayot, that it deals generally with separation and with repair. So, for example, all of the stories about the destruction of the temple are taught in Gittin. Halacha related to bringing peace is taught in Gittin. Halacha related to tikkun olam, something that we do for the public good, is taught in Gittin. And we we also notice that this tractate follows the social and moral degeneration that was described at the end of Sota, at the end of the previous tractate. Now, I'm not quite certain whether the order of the tractates today that we have it, this is the descending order of size, is the same as the order that they had in the time of the Mishnah. But if it is, it may be significant that the degeneration and the decline that is described at the end of Sota is then followed by a tractate that seems to want to deal with, if you like, repair and reparation, even if it's a repair from a situation which is just almost as tragic as the situation of the Sota, in the sense that we're dealing with, with a marriage which has failed. And I think it's very significant that the Mishnah talks about the relationship between the land of Israel and other lands. Indeed, the first verses that we dealt with dealing with the act of marriage and divorce from Devarim, from Kitei Tzei, we brought, just in very, very brief, we just brought the first two verses. But the verses then go on to talk about the land of Israel and the sanctity of the land. Straight away, they connect marriage and divorce, and they connect the sanctity of marital relationships with the sanctity of the land of Israel. So maybe it's not a coincidence that the Mishnah begins by meditating upon bringing a get from outside the land of Israel, on the relationships, if you like, between the Holy Land and Chutz La'aretz, between inside the land and outside the land, just like we're meditating perhaps on Kodesh and Chol. And the Mishnah is then going to, the Mishnah defines the limits of the land of Israel. And then the third Mishnah, which we're going to pick up today, begins to talk about, well, it begins to talk about living inside the land of Israel. Hameviget me Eretz Yisrael, someone who brings a get from the land of Israel, eino tzarich sheyomar, does not need to declare, b'fanai nichtav u'fanai nichtam, in my presence it was written, and in my presence it was signed, b'fanai nichtav u'fanai nitchatam, which we would always declare for a get coming from outside. Why is that? In yesh alav orim nit kayem but because if there are protesters, if someone might protest the validity of the get, well, who might do that? Well, obviously the husband, right? The husband might say, no, I never gave this divorce. I still want to be married. If someone protests it, well, we can establish the validity of get because of the people who signed it, which for practical purposes we could not do if it had come from a faraway place. Or, by the way, following another theory in the Gemara has two possibilities as to why we need these special procedures outside the land of Israel. Within the land of Israel, we are satisfied that a get is prepared adequately, is prepared properly, that people know how to prepare a get. And therefore, again, we can establish it via its signatories. Now, what about someone who can't talk? And the Mishnah must here be talking about someone who's been afflicted with some illness in transit, because you would never generally send a messenger with a get who can't talk. But the Mishnah is going to talk about someone who can't talk. Let's go on. והמביא גט ממדינת הים אינו יכול שיאמר. Someone who brings a get from abroad and he's not able to say b'fanai nichtav u'b'fanai nitchatam, he can't make that declaration. Im yesh alav edim nitkayem b'chotamav. If there are witnesses on it, its validity can be established through its signatories. In other words, we'd have to go to abroad to establish um, um, we'd have to go abroad to establish its validity, even in the absence of protesters. Now, we've been talking about the land of Israel, outside the land of Israel, social degeneration, the destruction of the temple, and of course, we're going to talk about slaves and slavery. This is one of the other themes that runs right through the tractate. Echad Gittin nashim ve'echad shachruchei avadim. Documents of divorce and documents of emancipation of slaves are, well, I've translated here as similar, but the Mishnah says echad, they're identical. Shavim b'molich u'mevi. They're identical in who takes them and who brings them. In other words, the same laws about them being valid inside the land of Israel just on their witnesses, and when coming from outside the land of Israel, they still require this declaration. And the Mishnah concludes, Zo achat min hadrachim sheshavu gitei nashim l'shachruchei avadim. And this is one of the ways in which bills of divorce are similar to documents of emancipation. But it's not the only way. So, for example, here is an idea that we've come before. We looked at the status of the Kuti, the Samaritan. These are people who perhaps dubiously converted to Judaism and don't seem to follow all of halakha. They're related to the Samaritans. It may well be the Kutim follow biblical law but not rabbinic law. And of course, this might make them suspicious in the eyes of the rabbis. And apparently they have a reputation for not being reliable in terms of evidence on monetary matters. They have this reputation, but apparently we do rely on them for documents of divorce. Kol get sheyesh alav ed kuti pasul. So we're going to apply the same ideas for the divorce document and the emancipation document. Kol get sheyesh alav ed kuti pasul. Any document that's got the signature of a kuti is invalid. Chutz mi gitei nashim v'shachruchei avadim, except for documents of divorce and emancipation of slaves. They go together. Ma'aseh shehaviu lifnei Rav Gamliel lichvar otni. It once happened that they brought before Rabban Gamliel at Kfar Otni get isha v'hayu edim v'hayu edav edei kutim v'hichshir, and its witnesses were kutim, and he said it was valid. So again, we're exploring. We've said we're exploring the boundaries between Israel and the nations, but of course the Kutim are halfway between. They're halfway between. They are Jews, but we don't treat them quite like Jews, although Rabban Gamliel did treat them like kosher Jews in this sense. And now we're going to talk about real non-Jews, Kol Ashtarot HaOlim, but Archaot Shel Goyim, all documents which are accepted in the courts of non-Jews. So we're in Roman times now, we're talking about Roman courts. Afal pi shechot mehen goyim, even though the signatories are goyim, are non-Jews, kasherim, they're all kasherim, they're all okay, they're all valid. But chutz migitei nashim v'shachrurei avadim, except for documents of divorce and emancipation of slaves. So it seems to me that we rely on the non-Jews for financial instruments, but not for marriage instruments, whereas we rely on the Kutim for marriage and slavery, marriage documents, but not for financial documents. Rabbi Shimon Omer. Rabbi Shimon has a disagreement. Kulam kasherim Lo hoskuru ela bisman she na'asu lehediot. Rabbi Shimon says, no, 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 everything is kasher. These are all kasher. They're only mentioned when they are prepared by someone who's an hediot. A hediot, by the way, is cognate with the English idiot, but it refers to someone who's not an expert. So, in other words, not, let's say if you ask three people to stand up, then they're a bet din. But we're not talking about a bet din of Dayanim as you'd see in Washington, D.C. or in London. Just three people as a bet din hediot. And we don't rely on those, certainly not if it's a document that's valid in a non-Jewish court. We wouldn't rely on that kind of document in a matter of Jewish marriage and divorce.